Good morning, everyone. I'm Carol Olson Day of the New York Times. I am delighted to welcome you to our 11th annual Arts and Leisure Weekend. It's 4 days of 15 Times Talks, live here at the Times Center in New York and live around the world on the web. This morning, we are thrilled to have a very special guest and thrilled that you were able to be among the early risers who are here to see him. Theater lovers know him from his many remarkable productions, including his current starring role in the new comedy by Teresa Rebeck called Seminar on Broadway. Television and film fans know him from his award-winning work on screen and behind the camera. And witches and wizards among you know him as a certain professor. You'll hear much more about this singular talent and his work from our moderator. He took over the Broadway stage for the Times in 2008 as theater reporter. He now covers all things Broadway and beyond, from the drama behind the scenes to the talent on the stage to the reality of the box office. Before coming to the Times in 2004, he was a reporter for the Boston Globe, where he was one of 2 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in beat reporting. So please join me in welcoming Patrick Healy and our very special guest, Alan Rikmon.
Thanks so much for being here, for getting up early and coming out and kicking off what's going to be a fun, long day of Times Talks. Alan, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm not awake yet, but so I don't know that I'm actually here.
What is your morning routine? What do you do to wake up and freshen up?
Well, it depends what you're doing for the rest of the day, but as I have 2 shows coming up today, which seems at the moment like a kind of impossibility. Usually, if you're involved in a theatre production, everything is geared towards that moment when you set foot on a stage. So tread carefully is what you do.
When you have a 2-show day, do you have a routine in between matinee and evening performances that works for you?
Well, you have to take it easy, but you mustn't take it too easy, because if you go too deeply asleep between the 2 shows, then it's too much of a shock to find yourself standing in the wings asleep just before you're about to go on. So tricky.
And how, as Broadway dressing rooms go, and I've seen a few of them, how cozy or not so cozy is yours?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Excellent. Tell us, if you can, a little bit. You grew up in London, a family. I believe your mother was stayed at home. Your father was a factory worker. How did you find your way into the theater as a boy or as a young man? What was the introduction, if you remember, for you?
Well, largely through school. I went to a great school and had a terrific English department, and the school had a very strong theatre tradition. In fact, we were usually elbowing the teachers out of the way for the best parts and the best costumes. But yeah, school.
Do you remember what your first school role was? How old you were?
Oh, well, not at that school, but I remember when the very first thing I ever did was at what we called primary school. So I don't know what you call that.
Elementary.
7 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I played the title role in a play called King Grizzlybeard. And I remember my mother cutting out a little triangle of fur out of a rug, which was applied with Scotch tape.
That's wonderful. Did your parents encourage you toward acting? What was their sort of feeling about your future?
Well, my father died when I was 8, so I don't think he even saw me as King Grizzlybeard. But, I think the safest thing to say is that my mother didn't discourage it. She always just said, whatever makes you happy.
Was there any tradition, for lack of a better word, of of acting, of art in your family that you came by?
My mother was a phenomenal singer.
Ah.
Yeah.
What was her voice like?
Pure soprano.
Yeah.
Yeah, but strange experience. You know, you have this person called your mother, and then the first time that it ever happened is kind of shocking, that she's asked to sing in front of maybe as many people as this. And it's discombobulating, because you think, who is that person?
Do you sing much?
Different.
Do you sing much yourself?
I don't know what I do, but I'm now on film singing in Sweeney Todd. Thank God for a singing teacher is all I can say.
You attended the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and I'm always curious what actors take away from professional training versus what they bring to their performance themselves. What did you, when you think back on RADA, what did you gain from that?
Well, I think I was I'd already trained as a graphic designer. I'd already worked in that profession, I think. And in fact, once I decided that now was the time, it was always too early for me at 18 to think about being an actor, although I probably always knew that's what I wanted to do. But other things had to be got out of the system, and then, you know, life is hindsight as much as anything else. Now I look back, I think, well, I needed to be at art school because that's very much part of my equipment. But when I decided I now would be an actor, what do? You write letters to repertory companies, and they all say, well, we've only got 2 equity cards a year to give. This was pre-Margaret Thatcher, when we had unions, but we've only got 2 equity cards a year to give, and you must accept that we are likely to give those to people who've trained. So then I thought, oh, well, I better train. But then it's going to be like a sausage factory, and I'll just be produced on a kind of assembly line. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, of course. It's very challenging, because they're basically teaching you that less is more all the time, and that truth is the great beacon word, and that you are the servant of the writing. And all of that takes a very long time to disseminate.
At RADA, did you know what you didn't know? Did you know what you needed to learn?
I think the thing about acting is that you've got, like a lot of things, a lot of activities, you've got this piece of your equipment called your head, and then there's this piece of equipment called your body, and then there's this dividing line called your neck that gets in the way in between. There's a wonderful Jules Pfeiffer cartoon, which is sort of appropriate, where he says, it's a series of drawings of heads, and he says, this is my head. It thinks, it talks, it charms. It has 100 wonderful tricks. I am proud of it. Then there's a series of drawings of disembodied bodies, I was going to say, disheaded bodies. This is my body. It is funny looking. It malfunctions. It looks best in winter clothes. Lucky for my body that I need it to chauffeur my head around. Otherwise, out it would go. And I think a lot of drama school, because it's dealing with this bit of the equipment and this bit, is about pulling the two together. And that takes forever too. So to answer your question, it's not really, as much as anything, it's about the teachers that you come into contact with who help you.
For a lot of us, I'm sure one of the things we enjoy quite a bit about your performances is your voice. When you got to RADA, do you remember what shape your voice was in? How similar it is to what we hear now?
Well, it was, you know, as I was just saying to you, what I hear is not what you hear, So I don't even know what you're talking about. But certainly when I was at drama school, it was the source of many complaints, big problems, a great deal of work. A lot of it's just to do with the architecture of your mouth, the sound you make. And then it's about the muscle strength in your tongue. And so once it all gets taken apart, you know, I had big problems.
We were talking backstage a little bit about some of those complaints. So hard to imagine for me as someone who loves listening to you. I did think about bringing a phone book just to have you read it to see if that really is true. But what were some of the complaints? What did people feel like needed to be fixed about your voice training-wise?
That I had very lazy diction, that I had a spastic soft palate, and that, as I was saying to you, my voice teacher said, you sound as if your voice is coming out of the back end of a drain pipe. So that's how cruel drama school is. It means, I suppose, basically that I had to learn to bring it all forward. It was all kind of traveling backwards.
At the time at RADA, were you thinking of a career, this goes to just how you sort of see performance, I guess, but thinking about a career on stage? Were they focusing on training for the BBC, for film? What was your sort of posture?
Oh, I think only the theatre, because we don't really have a film industry. Set by kind of default, and then so I never thought about doing film at all.
Was there an important stage role early on for you that maybe in hindsight even proved important or influential?
Well, you know, I suppose you think in terms of, you can join up the dots of, well, I did this and then that led to working with that director and that play, and then that led to that. I ran screaming from the Royal Shakespeare Company the first time I was there.
Why?
Well, to me it became, you know, there's a rude definition of acting. I forget which of the English actors it was that coined it, but he called it shouting in the dark. And that was my experience at Stratford the first time. It was just literally that, you know, get out there and shout at each other. And I really couldn't handle it. So I left after a year, and as luck would have it, or one of those joining up the dot moments was I did a play by Dusty Hughes called Commitments at the Bush Theatre in London, which is tiny. It's a pub, but very important in British theatre history, and some great stuff has been done there, and you don't have to shout at all.
Right.
And it was a terrific and very political play. That led me to going to the Royal Court to do The Seagull. That eventually led me to doing an Afro-Ben play called The Lucky Chance at the Royal Court. And very specifically, that led me to do Les Liaisons Dangereuses back at Stratford. But this time back at Stratford, I kind of knew what I was there for. I was a bit more in control of my destiny, I suppose.
It's interesting, back then I was sort of curious if you were an outlier or even a renegade in terms of not, let's say, going the Royal Shakespeare Company route, if there was sort of a well-paved path that RADA graduates were expected to take and you sort of made your own way, or if it was different.
No, I don't think, you see, one of the things that RADA perhaps suffers from is people's preconceptions about what it is and who comes out of it. You know, you've got to remember that it's people as diverse as Mark Rylance and Ben Whishaw and Imelda Staunton and Timothy Spall, and these are all RADA graduates, and others that you might not know, but it's like a grab bag. of different types. So there isn't really any such thing as a RADA actor anymore.
You mentioned Les Lésions Dangereuses. That was your Broadway debut in 1987 as Valmont. A year later, John Malkovich played the role on film. I was sort of curious how you found that first Broadway experience, how maybe it was different from experience that you'd had on stage in England, or if it was just very similar.
No, it's very different. It's, I mean, of course, you're doing the same play, and of course, we had arrived with a proven success, so that took some of the pressure off. But it is very different performing here in a good way, because you really do feel that theatre is part of the life of this city in a way that you don't in London. You know, London's so spread out as a city anyway. There isn't in any way the same kind of contact between people working. You know, you come out of the theatre and we go over the road to a bar or a restaurant and there's a bunch of actors who are all doing a show, and so you get to know each other here. Of course, it's kill or be killed here. You know, bad review and you're off anyway. So,
is the collegiality or camaraderie different in London versus New York among actors?
Yeah, I think it's better here.
Why? Do you have a theory about why?
Because it's smaller, because it's more contained. Yeah, and just again, what I was saying, well, you don't have a class system. That makes a huge difference in all sorts of areas. So, as an actor in New York, you are also just a person in New York.
Right.
And people look at you head on. You know, in London, there's a lot of people who are just staring at the sidewalk.
The following year, after that Broadway debut, you broke out in a little film in America called Die Hard. At the time, did you have any prescience, any sense of what that role might mean for you in terms of stamping your kind of performance on American film viewers' consciousness?
No, because I was, I thought, well, I've just finished 2 years on and off playing Valmont in Liaison Dangereuse, and I didn't really know how it worked at all. You know, I went to LA for some meetings, and 2 weeks later I was offered that film, and I'm talking to agents and saying, but this is an action movie. I don't know how to do that. And in fact, I guess some things are meant to be, and you just have to go with it.
Right.
And maybe because of my training, I was able to influence the story quite a lot. Because I said to them at the time, I was being fitted for all these terrorist gear, costumes, and I said, but why would I be wearing that stuff when I've got all these hulks around me, 6 foot wide as well as 6 foot high? And I said, and if I was in an ordinary suit, then maybe there could be a scene where I get to meet Bruce Willis and pretend to be the hostage. Right. And that went into the film, so.
Wow. All right. I'm going to call my brother right after this. That would be that would be the takeaway. I mean, you played a broad spectrum of people, of characters in your career, but for a certain segment of fans, you're thought of as an actor who is particularly expert at playing villains. Does that bother you?
Well, you'd have to name them, and you'd run out after about 3, I think, because if you say Die Hard and Robin Hood, then you start going, because everything else is somewhat more
complicated. A contrast to a film like Die Hard was a role you played a few years later, Colonel Brandon in Sense and Sensibility.
Yeah, a real villain.
Projects like Sense and Sensibility, adaptations of famous British works. Did you approach, say, this one enthusiastically? Is there sort of a leeriness of how a Sense and Sensibility will translate onto the screen for you?
Well, a lot of one's life as an actor is just hold your nose and jump, but with that, I love Jane Austen. We're very rude about her in seminar, but...
Wonderfully rude, but yeah.
It's genius writing, and I think it's absolutely one of those moments in life where you discover what literature is. And I remember the first time I read Persuasion, wanting to, you want to go out in the street and stop a passerby and say, look at that paragraph. Mm-hmm. Just look what she did there.
But you're a director as well as an actor. What does it take to do great literature on screen?
Well, you need a great script for a start, and of course that was the blessing with Sense and Sensibility, is that Emma had written such a brilliant version, and then they had what turned out to be the absolute sense and sensibility to hire Ang Lee. A lot of people thought, wow, that's a strange choice, but of course he absolutely understood the rules and regulations of family life coming from Hong Kong, and all that sort of family ritual in a way, and he knew exactly where to put the camera for any little emotional gear change. So you're taken through the story properly by a director's eye and heart, and driven by Emma's script.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any suggestions along the way that you made? You and Emma have worked now several times together, but I suppose that was relatively early in your professional relationship. But just in terms of Jane Austen or Colonel Brandon,
Not really, no. I mean, he was. There were times. I think it's documented. Emma wrote a book about the filming, and there are some quotes in there of. The only problem we had was, if it was a problem, was Ang's occasionally loose grasp of English, and we'd get notes that left you kind of staring into space. I remember he said to Emma once, Emma, try not to look so old. It's a little shattering for her at the time. But she knew to translate that as don't be so knowing. And then mine was, Alan, be more subtle, do more. By which we worked out that he meant do more of the subtle stuff. And Kate's quite early on, and she's only 19 in that, Kate, never mind, you'll get better.
Wow. Ang Lee, ladies and gentlemen.
His English is better now, I think.
What do you look for in a project that you're considering for film or screen? As you said, sometimes it's about just holding your nose and jumping, but what attracts you?
It's an instinctive thing, really. You just read it and you think, oh, I want to say that. Or I know who that person is.
Is it about the shape of the character being offered you, or is it more about the dialogue and the writing, necessarily?
It's all a bit unnameable, really. I mean, you know, good writing is immediately evident, and then there's good storytelling on top of that, and then there's a character that lives in 3 dimensions and has got, you know, that overworked word, a journey to it.
just so interesting. Reading, part of the thrill of my job is just being able to read plays or read scripts, and then you hear about who's being cast in a role. And we spend plenty of time at the Times doing imaginary casting of shows that are coming in. I think we killed a week on Follies when that was being developed. But when I heard, I read Seminar first, and then when I heard you were playing the character Leonard, became very excited. But it's interesting, you always, you see something on a page. Well, let's say for you, when you get a script and you are essentially reading the dialogue, maybe you have a sense of what the background of this character is supposed to be. Is there something in your instincts where you know, oh, this character is here right now and I'll be able to bring him to here, or I'll be able to fill it in a way that really excites you? Or maybe you don't think that way, but I'm curious.
I think that comes later. The first thing that happens is that images, with something that you think, well, I'm meant to do that, then images start jumping off the page at you. So it's a kind of chemical, kinetic thing happens. It's a slightly out-of-body thing. You're not entirely in control of it, and that's good.
With another more recent project of yours, Snowcake, what you just said, was there something about the character of Alex that rose up in that way for you?
Well, it was a little challenging because Angela Pell, who wrote the script, said she wrote it for me. So that's always a little nerve-wracking when you read it.
Had you ever heard that before? From a writer?
No. But I loved the script, and we had a very happy time doing it, and it's one of those things where you just kind of hang on to its coattails. In a way, I read it and I said, well, I'd like to do this. And I think you should think about Sigourney Weaver, and she and I had done Galaxy Quest together, a film we all loved doing, and I rang her and she read it and said yes immediately. So, you know, it was meant to happen, I think.
You had played with Sigourney before, as you mentioned, in Galaxy Quest. What's that relationship like, two actors, you and Sigourney? How do you play off each other?
Well, you don't have to think about it, you just sort of do it, because she did a lot of work. I mean, a lot of people who know what it is to live with somebody who's a functioning autistic person or high functioning say that's the most accurate portrayal of somebody with that condition they've ever seen. And she spent a lot of time with various institutions and individuals, so she came really prepared. It's got, all that matters there is coming up with a word in Scrabble and trying to deal with this person. Yeah, you can't know that it's comedy.
To what extent were you influenced in taking this role because it was a counterpoint to a certain long-haired, black-haired character you were playing for 10 years?
Well, he was somebody I would go back to for 7 weeks every year. So I was doing other things all the time. I mean, I did 6 months in Private Lives in London and then in New York. I directed a couple of theatre productions. I was making other movies. Galaxy Quest, I think, was around the same time as the first film, and Love Actually, and other movies. So it wasn't feeling that, well, I better contrast it with that.
I just was curious, during that period, if you were particularly more conscious of choosing roles that felt like a counterpoint, either just for fun or as a relief, or...
No, I never really thought like that. I've never really structured a career like that.
Yeah.
I think, in a movie industry that is absolutely worships youth, you're just grateful to be employed a lot of the time.
Okay, so let's get into it. You had 10 years in the role of Snape, who gave me chills far worse than you know who. How did that film role come about for you?
I was asked to do it. I went and had dinner with Chris Columbus and David Heyman, and the three of us sort of corporately said, okay, then let's.
Did you have any doubts or second thoughts about taking on the role?
Well, the difficult, if it was a difficulty, was that, of course, when we started it, J. Rowling had only written 3 of them, and I was playing the character where you had no idea where it was going. So that was tricky. It was clearly he had an agenda. You just had no idea what it was.
Did she know when you became involved where he would go, or was she?
Yeah. Jo knew everything, and I think it's true to say that she had put the ending into a safe right back then. She knew how it would finish.
Did she tip you off about where Snape would ultimately...
well, she didn't. I mean, there's a lot of speculation about this. Before I said I would do it, I said I have to talk to her. And I rang her, and she was with her sister at the time. She said, I can't talk now. So that's how much she kept it all to herself. She said, we'll talk tomorrow. And then we spoke the next day, and she gave me one small piece of information that was just a very small, and it certainly wasn't, and this will happen, and then that will happen, and this is how it finishes. I never knew any of that. But it was a small piece of information that let me know that there was more to him than met the eye.
Can you share what that was?
No. So I promised her I never would.
Okay.
And I never have.
Before filming of the first film was underway, did you or Joe or the director Chris Columbus have ideas for how to play Snape that were different from where the performance ultimately ended up?
Filming is a bizarre medium, you know. There's never any rehearsal. It's always about the product, or often about the product, and not very often is there time for rehearsal. So a lot of decisions, and that can be a good thing. It means that there's not too much thinking. You have to just do it. And I think with Harry Potter, a lot of it was just about people just commit and don't think about it too much. I was very involved in the costume and the look.
What did you want for it?
I was very specific about it. I said the sleeves should be really tight and there should be a lot of buttons. Because that helps me, the idea that he has to do that. It's actually buttoned in. And, you know, it's very different. If you've got a sleeve that finishes there, that's very different to a sleeve that finishes there. So it was very important to me that that's where it finished. And then buttons were tight up there.
Let's watch one more scene now, a scene from the final Harry Potter film, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2.
Gosh, spoiling the plot.
Many of you are surely wondering why I have summoned you at this hour. It's come to my attention that earlier this evening, Harry Potter was sighted in Hogsmeade. Now, should anyone, student or staff, attempt to aid Mr. Potter, they will be punished in a manner consistent with the severity of their transgression. Furthermore, any person found to have knowledge of these events who fails to come forward will be treated as equally guilty. Now then, if anyone here has any knowledge of Mr. Potter's movements this evening, I invite them to step forward. Now.
It seems, despite your exhaustive defensive strategies, you still have a bit of a security problem, Headmaster. I'm afraid it's quite extensive. How dare you stand where he stood? Tell them how it happened that night. Tell them how you looked him in the eye, a man who trusted you and killed him. Tell them.
You know, as a viewer and as someone who has read the books and seen the movies, I found that scene to be particularly satisfying. Do you, playing it, having played the character for all those years, do you sort of have those sort of emotional, maybe even cathartic moments with a role, or does it feel like a scene that you're playing and we move on to the next scene?
Well, no. I mean, with the last film, it was very cathartic because you were finally able to see who he was. And it was, I suppose, strange in a way to play stuff that was so emotional. Because a lot of the time, you know, you're working in 2 dimensions, not 3. It's a very clear outline that all of those characters have. But satisfying also on all sorts of levels. You know, Rafe and I had a scene where you just thought, well, finally here's just a couple of actors talking to each other, and no special effects. Just watching that scene, you think, well, thank God for computer graphics, because Maggie and I are having real... Holding a wand is not the most threatening thing. And pointing it at Dame Maggie Smith, you know, you've grown up worshipping from the cheap seats at the National Theatre. Yeah. And she's pointing it at you. And she can arch an eyebrow like nobody. So thank God for the sheets of flame. No, very cathartic on all sorts of levels. Then seeing Dan and Rupert and Emma, and that's 10 years where you watched people go from 12 to 22.
You've also worked as a director yourself on screen, on stage, most recently in New York, I believe, with Creditors at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. What do you enjoy most about directing that perhaps might be different than what you enjoy about acting?
Well, it's a very, very different activity, of course. And it goes back to what I was saying before about working out why I needed to go to art school when I did, because that part of my training and who I am is very much part of the equipment that I need as a director. and it's satisfying to be in control of the visual aspect as much as anything else. I'm passionate about storytelling, and sometimes you want to tell a story as an actor, and sometimes now, much more as a director. It takes a long time, I have to say, to get to the point, or it did for me, where you thought, I've actually got something to say. All these hopeful faces staring at you on the first day, it's a bit challenging. But over the years, you've learned that one of the greatest things a director can ever say to an actor that will make them immediately trust you is an actor will ask a question, the director will say, I don't know. And whenever you hear that from a director, something in the actor relaxes.
My next question may be a little overthought, but from your experience as a director, and let's say with creditors, is there anything that you learned from that experience that you have now brought to your latest Broadway role in Seminar? Two very different plays, but I wonder, as a director, if that helps you as an actor in this case.
Absolutely, and I think that working on film as an actor helps me work on stage as an actor. Everything is about distilling to me and trying to get simpler and truer. And that actually it's not about you, which is something I remember from one of the great teachers at drama school. You know, and when you think you've fought, kicked and screamed to get into this academy, and then a teacher says, just as you're about to get up and do some piece of work, she says, and remember, it's not about you. But it's true. And so ultimately, acting to me, whether as an actor or a director, and it's certainly very relaxing as an actor to think about, is focus on the other person. You have something to say to them. And usually you're saying something to this other person because of what they just said to you. So it's really just about accurate listening and then answering. So don't think about what you're saying, think about what you just heard, and what you say is automatic.
Tell us a little bit about your character, Leonard, in Seminar. Who is he? For those who've not seen the play either.
Well, the story is of 4 young writers in New York who hire a mentor, pay him $5,000 each for a 10-week mentoring period, and pretty early on are pretty resentful of the money they've given him. He's a truth teller, relentlessly truth-telling. And Teresa's writing is so brilliantly observed and constructed that you kind of just get on his train and ride it. But fortunately, he's also a human being. You do wonder whether that's going to be the case, but or whether he's just a destroyer, but he's not.
There's a great deal of comedy in the show, in the play. I loved it. And there's also some real emotional heft, I think, for me, that came from the scenes when you realize that they're not all just trying to undermine and undercut and destroy each other. There's some real affection, especially for talent and for the surprise that talent can hold. I am curious, a question that was emailed in from a fan of yours, John Collins, asked, what do you think Leonard would think of Joe Rowling's writing?
Probably be very jealous of what she's achieved. I'm sure he'd have to say it's, is there a female version of the word masterly? But anyway, storytelling. You can't fault it, really.
Great. Are there any elements of your character, Leonard, that you have or that you can relate to personally?
Well, I guess other people would have to say that. I don't think I'd be the person to say. I don't know. I mean, I suppose as a director, I think I'm gentler and more encouraging. I don't see the point in being destructive. And I don't think ultimately he is. He seems that way, but as a director, I absolutely don't see the point of insulting your actors or being destructive. I think the job is to encourage, as in fill with courage. You know, as an actor, when you're standing backstage about to go on in, whether it's Liaison Dangereuse or Private Lives or this, you do wonder what on earth you said yes for at certain times.
I recently returned to seminar to prepare for this for a second time, and just found myself really, really enjoying some of the detailed touches that maybe I was paying too much attention to in your performance. Just some of your pauses in dealing with Lily Rabe's character and Jerry O'Connell's character as you were sizing them up and speaking truth. And particularly just a moment that was very emotionally satisfying where your character Leonard and Hamish Linklater's young novelist character, you're reading his work that he's resisted sharing with you, and there's a moment where you're reading it, a long pause on the stage, and then your eyes just dart up and you see him, and it's a moment where you feel like someone is seeing a person in a different way that is exciting. Now that the play's been running 8 performances a week for about 2.5 months, do you find yourself changing up the performance in terms of pacing, line delivery, physical choices?
Yeah, I mean, every night, that's another thing one learns, is to be free and available to the air around you every night. And I'm on stage with 4 remarkable young actors. And there's huge trust amongst us, and listening. You're not going to listen now in the same way that you did 24 hours ago. Right. So everything's, in a way, everything's the same, and in a way, everything's different.
Is there an example you could remember recently of a moment in the play that a choice was just very maybe different than how it had been, that you were conscious of, or maybe that you enjoyed?
I don't really like nailing anything down, because in a way you destroy it by doing that. I think we're all aware of different timings and finding a different word and stressing it in a different way, or discovering a phrase that you hadn't really discovered before. It's all cumulative, and as time goes on, different moments acquire a little spotlight because of what you learnt in the previous weeks. So I would resist your desire for me to get out a hammer and nails to anything.
What do you enjoy in your free time? What do you enjoy doing for fun, to unwind?
You actually, I mean, do you mean while doing a play like this?
Or
because you don't have free time.
Yeah.
I'm in prison. Well, if young actors now say to me, what advice do you want to give to a young actor? I say to them, don't think about acting. You know, you're your own instrument. We were talking about that before, and so I've learned that I have to bring a person to a script. So if I have anything to pass on to young actors, it's, you know, read books, go to art galleries, know what's happening in the news, have opinions, fill yourself out, because a script is going to come at you, and who are you? You can't just be an actor. Again, it's down to who you are and what you want to do and what you want to spend your life doing and what's going to make you interested. And then it's about what scripts come to you, because you're not in control of that particularly. And then it's absolutely about what you say yes and no to. So I have said no to a lot of things, and it just so happens that I'm just as happy doing some small project like Snowcake, although to me that's not small, that you have to really fight hard to give life to. So it's about who you are as a person and the choices you make rather than, or the no's you say rather than the yeses. What keeps you interested? It changes all the time. The idea of typecasting is another hammer and nails. And I suppose I just resist that. I don't know where you lead from as an actor. It's going back to what we were saying about here's my head, here's my body. And people talk about acting being very you have to be centered. And if I think about what does that mean, it's somewhere here. Now, what is that? Is that your head? Is it your heart? Is it your groin? Is it your soul? It's something unnameable, but it's something you must engage. Otherwise, there's no connection. Directing for film is a mystery to me because how one ever arrives at the first day with a crew and a script and the money to do it is increasingly the biggest game of all. Tenacity and the big advantage to me is that you don't have to show up looking good at 6 o'clock in the morning as a director. Advice, I really don't know. You've just got to, it's got to be something you really, really want to, the story you really want to tell, because you're going to be with it for a year, even from the time you start. And then you're in the editing room. And then you're going through the whole publicity circus. So you've got to have a really strong sense of yourself as a team leader, and then as somebody who is going to live with that story for that length of time, that it's going to feed you. Theatre is a bad director is the one who, in the theatre, who is there through the 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks of rehearsal, and then you never see them again. They exist because they're on to the next project. A good director is one that stays in touch and knows that, as Pat was saying, it's going to change. And a good director should hope that that will happen and will let you go, but also know to rein you back in. You know, every job you do, you put all of yourself into. So I can't really divide them up. You have to figure out which bit of yourself is going to be needed for this, which pieces of the equipment, and then you have to get out the sharpening blades, and it's an impossible question to answer because every one of them is a piece of my life. You know, whether it's 6 months of doing a play is a long time. 5 weeks of shooting a film is still 5 weeks of your life with a bunch of people who you become very close to, and they were complete strangers. It's a weird existence. It's all part of this thing that will this afternoon, horrifically, be doing it again. Well, I mean, every actor that appears on film or on stage in leading roles and has some kind of reputation, every one of them has something that's uniquely them. You know, we could all, if Meryl Streep was sitting here now, you'd say, how the hell do you do that? And I look at clips of her being Margaret Thatcher, I think, how? Does she breathe it in? It's who you are. It's what you do, and you can't take any credit for it. All you have is a responsibility to it. And the same is true of anybody that takes what they do to some level of expertise. You have to work at it, keep working at it, challenge yourself, put yourself at the service of the writer. The writing is always the most important thing. You have to just hand yourself over to that. You're forced to watch things at premieres, and so I've seen those bits and pieces, but it's not a hobby of mine to watch myself at all, ever. And in fact, I was asked if they could show a clip from seminar, and I absolutely had to say no, because I'm still doing it, and I would not want to be watching that before I then have to do it today. So.
Thank you. That is all the time that we have. I want to thank Alan Rickman for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming out. Thanks so much.